Hello everyone, hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're diving into the moment Tu Tien finally faces her past in court, and the shocking twist when her old mother-in-law is forced to confess. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next episodes. The call comes in on a quiet morning, the kind of morning where the house almost feels normal again. Tu Tien is wiping down the table when Jack's phone buzzes. He checks the screen, and the change in his expression is immediate, focused, serious. The way he looks right before a difficult meeting. "It's the police station," he says. Tu Tien's hand pauses mid-wipe. She doesn't ask why, she already knows. Officer Thuy's voice is calm on the other end, but there's a firmness under it. The case is moving forward. There will be a hearing. Tu Tien needs to appear and give her statement in court. When Jack hangs up, he finds Tu Tien watching him like she's bracing for impact. "It's time," he says gently. "They want you there." Tu Tien nods, but her throat tightens anyway. She thought she was ready. She told herself she was ready. But readiness and reality are not the same thing. Jack reaches across the table and covers her hand with his. "We'll go together." Tu Tien forces a small smile. "I'm not scared of the courthouse," she says, trying to sound light. "I'm scared of what I'll feel when I see her." Jack doesn't pretend to misunderstand. He knows exactly who she means. Her former mother-in-law, Mrs. Thuy, a name that used to be attached to family dinners and old routines, and now sits on police reports like a stain that won't wash out. That morning, Mother Ly comes over early. She brings warm soup in a covered pot like she always does when someone in the family is facing something hard. She doesn't ask too many questions. She just looks at Tu Tien's face, then pulls her into a hug that holds longer than usual. "You don't have to be strong alone," Mother Ly murmurs. "Just tell the truth. That's enough." Tu Tien's eyes burn. She nods against Mother Ly's shoulder. Jack checks their papers twice: ID cards, the summons, the documents Officer Thuy told them to bring. He moves like a man who needs control over something, anything, because the rest of life has been too unpredictable lately. Before they leave, he crouches beside Anna and smooths the little collar of her shirt. "Be good for Grandma, okay?" he says. Anna stares up at him with serious eyes, like she understands more than people give her credit for. Then she reaches for his cheek and pats it, clumsy but comforting. Jack exhales and stands. "That child is too smart," he whispers to Tu Tien. Tu Tien tries to smile again. This time it almost works. Outside, the air has that early season chill. Jack gets behind the wheel of his white Ford Ranger pickup truck, and Tu Tien sits quietly in the passenger seat, hands folded in her lap. She watches the road without really seeing it. Jack doesn't fill the silence with meaningless talk. He just drives steadily, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift, as if the simple act of moving forward is the only lesson that matters today. When they reach the courthouse, Tu Tien's chest tightens at the sight of it. Tall steps, pale walls, people coming and going with serious faces and clipped voices. It feels like a place where your life can be summarized into a few pages and read out loud by strangers. Officer Thuy meets them at the entrance. She's in uniform, hair neatly pulled back, a folder tucked under one arm. "Tu Tien," she says, then nods at Jack. "Thank you for coming on time." Tu Tien swallows. "I didn't sleep much." Officer Thuy's expression softens, but her voice stays professional. "That's normal. Just answer clearly. If you don't understand a question, say so. If you need a moment, ask. No one can rush your truth." Jack glances down at Tu Tien. "You hear that?" Tu Tien nods again. Her hands are cold. Inside, they go through security. The hallways smell faintly of old paper and polished floors. The sound of footsteps echoes in a way that makes everything feel more dramatic than it should. They sit on a bench outside the courtroom while Officer Thuy speaks briefly with someone at a desk. Jack keeps his shoulder close to Tu Tien's, a quiet shield. "You can still step out," he murmurs, "if it's too much." Tu Tien shakes her head. "If I step out now, I'll step out forever," she says. "I need to finish it." Jack's eyes hold hers. "Then we finish it." When the doors open, they're guided inside. Tu Tien's first instinct is to look for the judge. Then she looks to the side and her breath catches. Mrs. Thuy is there. She looks different and yet the same. Same posture, same sharpness in the chin, same way her eyes scan the room like she's measuring what she can still control. But there's something else now too. A tension, a thin edge of fear hiding behind stubborn pride. Mrs. Thuy doesn't look at Tu Tien right away. When she finally does, it's quick, almost dismissive, like she's refusing to let Tu Tien have the satisfaction of being acknowledged. Tu Tien's stomach turns. Jack's hand finds her wrist and squeezes just once. A reminder, stay here, breathe. The hearing begins with formalities, names, dates. The charge is read out in a steady voice that makes everything sound both simple and terrifying. Robbery, assault, abandonment in the forest. Tu Tien hears the words and feels as if the room tilts slightly. It's strange, hearing your pain turned into legal language. Then Mrs. Thuy speaks. Her voice is firm, rehearsed. She denies everything. "I didn't do it," she says, looking toward the front as if Tu Tien isn't even in the room. She is lying. She has always exaggerated. She wants to ruin my life. Tu Tien's fingers curl into her palm so tightly her nails press half moons into her skin. Jack's jaw tightens, but he stays silent. He knows that reacting won't help. "Not here," Mrs. Thuy continues, twisting the story like it's soft cloth she can reshape. She claims she met Tu Tien by accident. She claims she tried to help. She claims the situation has been misunderstood. Tu Tien listens, and something inside her aches, not because she believes it, but because a part of her still remembers the older version of this woman, the version that used to be family, even when family was complicated. Officer Thuy stands when it's her turn to speak, her tone clear and direct. "Your Honor," she says, "we have evidence that contradicts the defendant's statement." Tu Tien's heart pounds harder. Documents are presented, witness accounts, a timeline. Then comes the part that changes the air in the room. Security footage. Not perfect, not cinematic, but enough. Enough to show movement at the right time, enough to match clothing, enough to place Mrs. Thuy and her accomplice where they claimed they never were. Tu Tien watches Mrs. Thuy's face as the footage is referenced, and she sees it. The moment confidence fractures. It's subtle, just a swallow, a blink that lasts too long, a shift in posture like someone realizing the ground beneath them isn't solid. Then another piece of evidence is brought forward, an item recovered, an identification confirmed. The details stack one on top of the other until denial starts to sound ridiculous even to the person saying it. Mrs. Thuy's voice grows sharper, then quieter, then strained. Finally, after one last attempt to argue, she goes still. Her shoulders drop slightly, like the fight drains out all at once. When she speaks again, her tone is different. I didn't think it would go that far," she says, barely above a mutter. Tu Tien closes her eyes for a brief second. Not because she feels victorious, because the confirmation hurts in a new way. It wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real, and now it's being said out loud. The judge's decision comes after the review of everything. The sentence is read clearly, 5 years in prison. The number hits the room and then settles. Heavy. Final. Tu Tien sits there, staring ahead, feeling an odd mix of relief and grief. Relief that the danger has a name, a consequence, a wall between her and the person who harmed her. Grief because the person receiving that consequence is someone she once called family, even if that family was painful. Jack watches her closely, reading her face, like he's afraid she might collapse right there in the courtroom. When the hearing ends and people begin to stand, Tu Tien's legs feel weak. She rises slowly, misses. Tu is led away. For a moment, as she passes, her eyes flick toward Tu Tien again. There is no apology in them, no softness, just bitterness, and something that looks like regret, but too tangled up in pride to become human. Then she's gone. Outside the courtroom, the hallway feels brighter, louder, like life didn't pause for any of this. Tu Tien finally exhales, shaky. Officer Thuy steps closer. "You did well," she says. "This was important." Tu Tien nods, but her voice comes out thin. "I feel sad." Officer Thuy doesn't look surprised. "That's also normal. Justice doesn't erase emotions. It just protects you going forward." Jack puts an arm around Tu Tien's shoulders and guides her toward the exit. On the steps outside, Tu Tien stops and looks at the sky. The air is cold, but it's clean, like a new page. Jack tilts his head, studying her. "Do you want to go straight home?" Tu Tien hesitates. Jack's voice softens. "Or we can sit somewhere quiet first, just for a little while. No pressure." Tu Tien looks at him, and in his face, she sees what she always sees lately. Worry held back by love. She whispers, "I don't want to carry this feeling into the house." Jack nods once. "Then we won't." He opens the passenger door for her like he's decided this moment matters just as much as any contract meeting ever could. And as they pull away from the courthouse, Tu Tien leans back in the seat, eyes half closed, letting herself finally feel the exhaustion of being brave. The cafe Jack chooses isn't flashy. It's one of those quiet places tucked behind a line of trees, with warm lights even in the daytime, and soft music low enough that you can still hear your own thoughts. Jack parks, walks around, and opens Tu Tien's door before she can even reach for the handle. That tiny gesture, so normal, so him, makes her throat tighten again. Inside, the air smells like roasted coffee and buttery pastries. A couple of older customers sit near the window, speaking softly, the kind of peaceful scene that almost feels unfair after a courtroom. Jack guides Tu Tien to a corner table where no one will stare. He orders for both of them without making it a big deal. "Hot milk for you," he says, "and tea if you want it later." Tu Tien gives him a small look. "You're acting like I'm a child." Jack sits down across from her, eyes steady. "No, I'm acting like I love you." For a moment, Tu Tien can't answer. She stares at the table's wood grain, trying to arrange the mess inside her chest into something she can explain. Jack doesn't rush her. He just rests his hands around his cup and waits. When the drinks arrive, Tu Tien wraps her fingers around the warm glass. The heat spreads slowly into her palms, and that simple warmth makes her feel like she's still here, still safe. Jack breaks the silence gently. "Tell me what you're feeling." Tu Tien's mouth opens, then closes again. She tries a different angle. "I thought I would feel satisfied," she admits. "Like finally, it's over." Jack nods. "And you don't." Tu Tien shakes her head. "I feel lighter, yes, but I also feel heavy." I keep remembering her face from before, back when things were messy but still human. Jack watches her carefully. "You feel sorry for her?" Tu Tien hesitates, then nods. "A little, and I hate that I feel that." Jack leans forward, lowering his voice. "Don't hate yourself for having a heart. Feeling sorry doesn't mean you excuse what she did." Tu Tien's eyes sting again. She stood there and denied everything. She looked at me like I was the problem. Jack's jaw tightens, but his voice stays calm. That's what people do when they can't face what they've done. They turn it into someone else's fault. Tu Tien looks down at her drink. 5 years. It sounds like a long time. "It is," Jack says. Then he pauses. "But it's also a boundary. A wall. It means you can breathe." Tu Tien's shoulders rise and fall with a shaky breath. I keep thinking, if I hadn't married you, maybe none of this would have happened. Jack's eyes narrow slightly, not angry, just firm. Don't go there. Tu Tien tries to speak again, but he gently cuts in, the way someone stops a friend from stepping into traffic. Listen to me, Jack says. You didn't create her choices. You didn't create violence. You didn't create greed. You survived it. Tu Tien looks up at him, and the steadiness in his face makes her feel both comforted and exposed. Jack continues softly, and I'm not proud of you because you suffered. I'm proud of you because you showed up today anyway. Tu Tien's lips tremble. I almost didn't. I know, Jack says. Your hands were shaking this morning. Tu Tien gives a fragile smile. You noticed everything? I notice you, Jack replies. That's the point. They sit in silence for a moment, letting the truth settle. Then Jack reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small pack of tissues, placing it on the table like he's making a quiet promise. No more hiding, no more pretending nothing happened. Tu Tien glances at it and exhales, half laughing, half crying. You're still angry about that tissue? Jack's expression softens. Not angry at you. Angry that you felt like you had to carry it alone. Tu Tien's gaze drops again. I didn't want to ruin your life. Jack's voice becomes gentler, almost a whisper. You are my life. That sentence lands heavier than any courtroom verdict. Tu Tien blinks fast, trying not to cry in the cafe, but the tears come anyway, quiet and steady. She turns her face slightly toward the window, embarrassed. Jack doesn't tell her to stop. He just sits there, letting her be human. After a moment, he speaks again, lighter this time. Do you remember the first time we came to a cafe like this? Tu Tien sniffs, wiping her cheek. You ordered something expensive and then hated it. Jack lets out a short laugh. Yes, and you drank it anyway so it wouldn't be wasted. Tu Tien's smile grows a little. You looked so offended. Because you were right, Jack says. You always are. That small exchange does something important. It loosens the tightness in Tu Tien's chest. It reminds her that her life isn't only courtrooms and police reports. It's also laughter over stupid coffee. Jack watches her smile and relaxes too, as if he's been holding his breath for hours. Then his phone buzzes once. Tu Tien's eyes flick to it instinctively, and Jack notices. He flips the phone face down without checking. Not now, he says. Tu Tien studies him. You don't have to pretend everything is fine. Jack's tone is calm. I'm not pretending. I'm choosing priorities. Tu Tien takes a slow sip of her drink, then asks quietly, Do you think this is really over? Jack doesn't give a dramatic answer. He gives an honest one. I think the biggest danger is behind us, he says. But life doesn't stop trying to test people. That's why we protect each other. Tu Tien nods, absorbing his words. After they finish, Jack pays, and they walk out into the cool air together. The world feels a little less threatening when she's not walking it alone. On the drive back, Tu Tien rests her head against the seat, eyes half closed. Jack keeps one hand on the wheel and glances at her every few seconds, like he's checking that she's still okay. Halfway home, his phone rings again. This time, he answers, because the caller ID shows Mother Ly. Mom, Jack says. Tu Tien listens, quiet. Mother Ly's voice comes through, tired but relieved. Are you two done? Yes, Jack says. We stopped for a drink. We're on the way back now. There's a pause, then Mother Ly speaks more softly. How is she? Jack looks at Tu Tien, then answers honestly. She's sad, but she's breathing. Mother Ly exhales, like she's been holding tension in her chest all day. Tell her she did the right thing, and tell her I'm proud of her. Tu Tien leans slightly toward the phone. Her voice is gentle. Mum, I'm sorry I made everyone worry. Mother Ly's reply is immediate. Don't apologize for surviving. Come home and eat something. I'll make soup. Tu Tien swallows. Thank you. When Jack ends the call, the car feels warmer, even though the weather hasn't changed. Back at home, the familiar sounds greet them, the dogs, the yard, the quiet rhythm of their life. Mother Ly is already there, moving around the kitchen with purpose. Like feeding people is her way of stitching a family back together. Tu Tien steps inside and pauses when she sees Mother Ly. Without thinking, she walks forward and hugs her. Mother Ly holds her tightly. "It's done," she murmurs. "It's done." Tu Tien nods into her shoulder. "I feel guilty." Mother Ly pulls back just enough to look at her face. "Guilt is not a punishment you need to carry. Let it go." Jack stands nearby watching them, and for the first time in days his shoulders drop a little. That evening, after soup and quiet conversation, Jack and Tu Tien sit on the porch with warm blankets. The air is cold, but the house behind them glows with simple light. Tu Tien looks at Jack and speaks softly, almost like she's afraid to disturb the peace. "Today felt like a funeral," she admits. "Not because someone died, but because something ended." Jack nods. "Yes, a chapter ended." Tu Tien's voice trembles slightly, "and I don't know what the next chapter is." Jack reaches for her hand, interlocking fingers the way he always does when he wants her to feel anchored. "We'll write it," he says, slowly, "together." Tu Tien leans her head on his shoulder, and for a few minutes, they don't say anything else. Because sometimes the strongest ending isn't a big celebration. Sometimes it's simply two people sitting side by side, finally able to breathe again. Tu Tien is summoned to court to testify against Mrs. Thuy and her accomplices for snatching her necklace, attacking her, and abandoning her deep in the forest. With Jack beside her, she stands before the judge and recounts what happened, voice steady but eyes heavy. Mrs. Thuy tries to deny everything, twisting the story and blaming misunderstandings. But the police present clear evidence and witness details that corner her. In the end, Mrs. Thuy lowers her head and admits the crime, receiving a 5-year prison sentence. After the hearing, Tu Tien feels conflicted, relieved that the danger is finally addressed, yet saddened for the woman who once was family. Jack gently comforts her, then suggests a quiet cafe stop on the way home, giving her space to breathe, grieve, and start letting go, while Anna waits with Mother Ly at home,